Hello, everyone, and thank you all for attending our fifth day of the Ethiopia Modern Nation Ancient Roots Conference. Our upcoming session is titled Writing Ethiopia, Identity and the Literary Imagination. It will begin very shortly and will be moderated by Professor Elizabeth Giorgis, Professor of Theory and Criticism at Addis Ababa University. I would just like to mention a few housekeeping details. The duration of the panel is 2 hours, including the Q&A portion. I would also like to mention that this webinar is being live streamed on YouTube through our Africa Institute channel to increase access across countries that do not have access to Zoom. Thank you again for joining us. I would now like to introduce Professor Elizabeth.
So greetings, good evening from Sharjah. It's evening over here, 6 o'clock. So I'll begin with Ida first. Ida Edamariam is an Ethiopian-Canadian journalist based in the United Kingdom. He was formerly Deputy Review and Books Editor of the Canadian National Post and is now a senior feature writer and editor at The Guardian in the UK. Her memoir about her grandmother, The Wife's Tale, a personal history, won the Ondach, I don't know if I'm saying it right, prize in 2019. So she's going to talk about that book today. Luleadey Tadesse, the second speaker, graduated in English from Addis Ababa University, English literature from Addis Ababa University. She taught different courses, including English literature and language courses at Addis Ababa University. She joined Qatar University in 2015 as a writing specialist and is currently working as a senior writing specialist in the same university. Girma Fantaye is a writer and former print journalist. He's the co-founder of the leading political newspaper, Addis. When the newspaper was shut down in 2005, I think, when it was shut down by the government, he lived in exile in Uganda. And while in exile, he wrote a book called Yetasfashwan Katama Asasa, and also published a collection of poetry and the novel called Self-Made. Girma returned to Ethiopia in 2019 after many years in exile. Ejra Abate, the fourth speaker, is the current dean of the College of Performing and Visual Arts at Addis Ababa University, which constitutes of the Yared School of Music, the School of Fine Arts and Design, the School of Theater Arts, and the Modern Art Museum Gabra Christos Desta Center. He was also at one time the director of the Yared School of Music. Ejra received a PhD from the Institute of Peace and Security Studies at Addis Ababa University recently. A well-accomplished pianist, Ejra switched from music to conflict resolution. You may not like me saying that, and peacemaking. And he will talk about music and conflict resolution today. So having introduced the panelists, in this roundtable, we have 3 literary people who look at Ethiopia through literature. 2 of them, Luleadey and Girma, are looking at 2 novels to understand the present predicaments, political, cultural, and social histories of the country from novels that were written in the 1960s. Luleadey looks at a historical novel called Kulubi, while Girma looks at the character Gudu Kasa from one of the most celebrated novels in the country, called Fikr Iska Maqabr, or Love Until the Grave, by the great novelist, writer, diplomat, Addis Alamaye. Ida, on the other hand, looks at history from a 60-hour-long conversation held with her grandmother in the book called A Wife's Tale that everyone has to read. A fascinating book that I thought I was reading my own mother's story. I did a review on it on Africa as a Country on the August issue, so look for that too. So now I would like to bring 2 points so that it can prompt a discussion of a sort among the 3 literary people, and then I'll come to Ejra after the literature people take the floor, because he's talking about completely different genre music. So one reflection is that it's interesting to bring literature to understand history. As all of you say, novels or memoirs, in the case of Ida, can represent history. We can read history through the stories they tell. If we can talk about that a little bit, since this is a new way to understand history, particularly in the Ethiopian context, which the larger discipline of history, which is called professional history, more or less dismisses such understandings of the notion of history. The second is this question I have about historical novels. How do we understand historical novels? I'm particularly referring to historical novels that have come about in the diaspora in recent history. Is the understanding of history different in the diaspora's imagination than its local understanding? For instance, I consider The Wife's Tale, Ida Edemariam's book, a historical novel because of her grandmother tells us her story through history. And through what her grandmother told her, the author takes us to a more elaborated notion of that history that we're familiar with. And in that elaboration may arise fictionalization, of course. But the story still intimates to the, I would say, still intimates to the larger history we're most familiar with. But Ida is also more or less diasporic, and she managed to converse with the larger history. Her imagination seemed intimate with the history I know, for instance. Does knowing language and the nuances it's imbued upon make a difference? I don't know if you can reflect on this, because there seems to be ambiguity in what's called the historical novel that's imagined from different perspectives. Does it not have a common perspective that talks to all of us in some capacity? So by historical fiction, I'm broadly including novels and personal memoirs as well. So I hope you understand these 2 points. We can start with these 2 points. Can I start with Ida? Okay, so let's, Luleadey, you want to continue and then until Ida comes back, so.
Okay, Elsie, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the African Institute for making me a part of this phenomenal conference. So yeah, Elsie, if I get your question right, what does literature tell us that historical texts don't? So my understanding of it is that the significance of literature certainly lies in the fact that it gives life back to history. I'm not saying that history is lifeless. This is particularly for the historians, but through its imaginative faculty, literature helps us to sort of fully appreciate history. It gives history a life force without which our attempt to understand historical texts becomes somewhat impoverished. So I believe the parallel reading of literary texts and history kind of helps us understand history in its intricacies, in all its complications. So that's why literature is an important archive to me. And that was what I tried to do in this novel. What I tried to do was, it's about Ethiopia. The story was set in the pre-1974 Ethiopia, right before the revolution. So it's a very voluminous work, to be precise, 517 pages. It's written by an American author, Edmund Murray, who was at that time working as a journalist in Ethiopia. So it tries to cover a wide range of issues, cultural, economic, political lives of Ethiopians during that particular era. So like I said, what makes this novel important in our understanding of Ethiopia during that period is the fact that it juxtaposes different issues which were very prevalent during that time. Issues such as the conflict between tradition and modernity, identity politics, so on and so forth. So it gives history life to me, literature. That's how I see it.
Okay, tell us a little about the story about Kulubi. Most of us have not read it. So just a little briefing about the story. And you were talking about women's agency. and why it's very prevalent to today's predicaments, political predicaments of the country. So just briefly, if you can take us through that, that would be great.
Absolutely. So the novel is, the physical setting of the novel is Kulubi Gabriel, the celebration. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a sacred ceremony in commemoration of the Archangel Saint Gabriel. And the pilgrims include people from all walks of life, from Emperor Haile Selassie and his top officials to educated and business elite to ordinary Ethiopians. Another interesting aspect of the novel is that most of the characters, including Emperor Haile Selassie, are modeled after prominent historical personalities. So what we see is people go to Kulubi and so much happens there. Everybody goes there. So Kulubi emerges as the microcosm of Ethiopia, because we see political tension there, the economic situation of the people, the central role that the church plays, and everything. And aside from that, we see women through characters such as 1080, I think, which refers to Shisamania, a lady after whom a neighborhood is named. I grew up around that area. So we see very strong women having their own agency, playing very prominent roles in the political landscape of the country during that time. But we also see how middle-class Ethiopians, especially the educated elite were very highly politically conscious, and at the same time disillusioned, because they expect the much sought after progress to take place in their country, but so much is curbing its progress, one of which is the church. So it's a very interesting novel, but like I said, there are a wide variety of topics that it tries to cover. Because of that reason, for example, Harold Marx refers to it not as necessarily a successful novel, but a good book about Ethiopia. So
yeah, so just so that for people who don't know, if you can talk about Shisamania, because you were talking about strong women, but strong women from what perspective? You know, Shisamania had her own career. What was that? And we should, this is the kind of thing that really, when you do gender history, you have to start from these people who didn't really have ethical, whatever, quote unquote, ethical type of career.
I know. She owned, I don't know how that translates into English, zigbait, and closed bars, sort of, yes. Yeah, but she started from a very humble background. So it so happens that she made this prominent military man, through whom she became very famous in her brothel. Significant political conspiracies, plottings are taking place in the novel. So she plays the different parties against each other. On the one hand, we see her supporting the critics of the government, and on the other hand, we see her playing a role as if she supports the government. So in spite of the fact that she came from this sort of background, but her role in the novel is quite significant, especially for the political developments that were taking place during that time.
Mm-hmm. So I have a thing from Ximena who said the debate is called Speak Easy. So just
what is that again?
Speak Easy, she said. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Samia, for that.
Okay, so basically you're looking at the history of the 60s and how it's that has influenced the history of the present.
And 70s, yeah, to be precisely right before the revolution.
Okay. Okay, so that's all. Let's go to Ida. She's back again. So, Ida, thank you. Okay, so let me ask you. So you were talking about your grandmother lived until she was 90 years old when she passed. So she passed through a lot of history of the country. So That's one fascinating aspect of the whole book. And the story is told, the histories are told very well researched. I mean, you didn't really take her word and just put it like it is, but you just researched the history itself, the history that she passed through. So that's one fascinating aspect for me. It was really fascinating that you really related to the reader, through different historical moments. So that was one. So your research, if you can talk to us about that research. The second one is this: you've kind of initiated a history of gender as well. When I was saying, you were talking, it seemed like you were talking like about my own mother. The question of Zar, for example, that's completely disappeared now. Husband and wife relationship, this the love relationship, as well as the contra, the other side of the relationship too. And what fascinated me in that too, you didn't really, okay, that was the relationship that women went through, this type of relationship. But you didn't really bring it out like how cruel and this and that. You brought the love at the same time. You brought the cruelty, or I don't want to call it cruelty, but the husband beating the wife, kind of. And the way you end it is like, the way you raise it is like, he raised the stick. And then she said again, that sort of stuff, which is really nice, which I thought was very, it showed the complicated history of man and wife at that time. But that's a great work. I mean, you have to dream in Amharic to indulge in that type, and you dreamt it well, I think. So if you can tell us a little about the gender aspect, and then, because it's about her. So, and this, what is it? I mean, I'm from a certain generation, right? I'm not as young as you all are. So these days, this relationship between husband and wife is called, domestic abuse, and you're tried in court. Of course, it's abuse, but then it's a certain, not, I don't want to say it's a certain type of abuse, but it's a relationship between man and at the time. And it has to be understood in that context. Thank you. So, I just concentrated on that because, my next book is supposedly on gender. It's very hard to get anything about gender. So you go into these, the literatures, like Lula said, and I want Lula to speak about it too. So, I mean, it gave me, your book gave me a rich social history, the unofficial history of a sort, of a woman who lived through her 90s, through different historical periods, and what it means to be a woman. So it was a very important book. So I'll keep talking. Otherwise, I have to give the podium to the discussion before. But I want Lula and Girma really to reflect on, Lula, you said about gender, right? If you can tell us a bit about how we can historicize from that book, history of gender, because there is, I'm concentrating on this because there is absolutely nothing in our archives, absolutely nothing. So we have to look into these types of literature as a genre. We have to look at to understand what the history of what the stories of gender were during a certain moment of history. So Lula, if you can just talk about Kulubi and gender, and I'll ask Garmao too to reflect on that Ngudu Kasa and how he perceived women. Addis Alamayo himself, and how Fikr Islam Makabar reflected on women. And then I'll go to Isra and then open it up for discussion. Lula.
Okay, Elsie. From the perspective of this novel, like I said, women are quite independent, and you see all sorts of women. On the one hand, you see married women who kind of go against the will of their husbands in doing things. On the other hand, you see women who are educated and who sort of speak on equal footing with their men counterparts. And we also have women like Shisa Manya, who own bars and who have a very significant role in the whole political landscape. We also have, mothers in the story, quite independent. So nowhere in this novel, I must say that women are represented as weak and passive. In fact, it's quite interesting to see these women you know, in different forms of life are quite a boss of their own. So I don't know, perhaps this is a perspective from an outsider, a foreigner, but it's quite interesting to me, and I believe in that. I mean, I grew up with my grandmother, who is a symbol of strength to me, and it can be surprising, because if you see that all these kinds of women, okay, how come this mother be so independent while she's supposed to obey her husband? You know, you can ask all sorts of questions, but to be honest, the ways women are represented in the story pretty much reveal the possibility of, like, or the existence of women as independent and with their own agencies in the Ethiopian society. So I think that's what I can say, because I have to base my understanding of the gender aspect on this novel, and this is what I can say.
Oh, thank you, Lula. One thing Mr. Makabar tells us is that marriage, I mean, women outside marriage were very normal. You know, there were open concubines that the husbands, you know, took women to the war front. It was very well accepted with the wife. The wife probably had her own, Wajaro, or whatever her name is, probably had her own thing. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. That marriage was really when modernity came with Haile Selassie's period. It was promulgated that one man, one woman. Before that, it was open marriage type of. But I just wanted to bring that up. But Ijra, I'm sorry we took a long time, but you would. So can we bring you in now? Because
yes, indeed.
Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Good. So can we talk about music? Ijra is going to talk to us about music and conflict resolution today, and then the discussion will all come together for the discussion. It's just the three of them were in literature, so we wanted to give you a special podium for music. So can you begin on that? So what because your main thesis now, you've moved to, I mean, you're still the dean of the college of the performing and visual arts, but you just recently finished your PhD in conflict, peace and security.
Peace and security studies.
But you know, mostly related to conflict, and you always talk about how music can be a very important tool for conflict resolution, particularly in our side of the world where conflict is very pervasive. So can you tell us about that?
Especially recently.
Especially recently, exactly. So tell us about why music. Why do you think music, or in what context is music influential to resolve conflict?
Well, the thing why I'm just focusing on music and the conflict transformation, you know, the thing when you are just thinking about conflict, people are always thinking on the elite level. They want to resolve conflict on the, you know, top down kinds of thing. You know, the conflict is down to the ground, but people are starting to resolve conflict on the elite level. So with my background as a musician, as an artist, and then studying peace and security studies, I'm just thinking, how do we reach to the ground level, to the people? So what is the experience, our experience, the Ethiopian experience? How do we use music to resolve conflict positively and negatively, you know, from the early age to the current situation? And looking at that, I'm just trying to see different periods, especially recent periods, you know, during the imperial period and the Derg regime and the current regime, how the musicians, especially, I'm just focusing on the current period, how musicians are focusing on the current narratives of the, you know, the ethnic concepts of federalism to the unitary thinking of the people. They were doing different kinds of, you know, mixing or fusion of different kinds of music, and taking different kinds, this type of samples. I'm just trying to analyze how people are taking different ideas to different kinds of people. the thing is, music, yes?
Can you adjust your camera? A lot of people are sending messages here. Because you're, yeah, just.
They can't see me?
They can't see you. So, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So that is why I'm just focusing on music and conflict transformation. So the thing is, music, what I think is music rather than a language may provide a better medium for interrogating the character of conflict and for evaluating the quality of conflict resolution. While people are using language as a prose tends to define interpretation, and music as a practice serves to liberate interpretation according to the multiple views of audience's reception. That means, the thing is, you can easily reach to the people with different mediums. That is the very easiest medium to reach to the people is art. It could be music, fine arts, theater. But my focus is music. Music could reach to the people to transform different kinds of ideas. That is, you can transform conflict through music. So you can see currently different pop singers are using different kinds of medium, fusing one types of culture with other types of rhythm. Suppose Amharic with Tigrinya or Amharic with Orominya. They were trying to bring two different kinds of ethnic groups into one. They can transform different kinds of ideas. I was trying to do this type of things into my writing. So the music which we have in our country, in Ethiopia, could transform when critical theories have emphasized the monologic characters of language in its written form. They have also noted the multivalent potential of music in its practical guidance. Music can give different kinds of, you do have the music, you do have a rhythm, you do have the language in music, you can transform different ideas into your music. While writing may be a critical factor in the different ideas of a separate literature, music in contrast as a language may present a more fertile locus for studying multiple interpretation of war, diverse reading, and peace into one. You can transform conflict positively or negatively through music. And some ethnomusicologists think that recognizing a variable character of music, meaning a partial truth depending on unstable relationship between musical text and cultural context. It depends. Cultural context, some people are using music as their own musical expression on different kinds of podiums to transform conflict negatively or positively. The variable of further unsettled communal context where music making invites an assorted array of distinctive social position. These are the main basic ideas what I'm just trying to do in my paper. So I would like to give more podium to the audiences to ask me and reflect on my writings on music and conflict rather than me talking too much.
Okay, so thank you, Ijra. So yeah, let's open it up for discussion. Dagmawi Yimar has asked, please tell us where we can find Aida's, Girma's, and Luleadey's books. Aida's book is called A Wife's Tale, a personal memoir. It's on Amazon. You can order it through Amazon. But Girma's is Fikr Iska Maqabr. Girma is talking about Fikr Iska Maqabr, the book Fikr Iska Maqabr. I don't think you can find it on Amazon, but it's sold in Addis Ababa everywhere. You probably can get it on PDF too. I shouldn't say that, but a PDF version of it online. And Luleadey is talking a book that was published in 1960 called Kulubi. I don't know where can you find it, Luleadey? I haven't seen it in Addis, maybe in the libraries. Where can you find it, Luleadey?
It's actually published in 1973. Okay. I got mine from Amazon, but since it's an old book, maybe you can't be sure to to find it every time. So it comes and it goes. So he has to keep looking.
Okay.
I got mine from Amazon.
Okay. Okay, so I'll open it up for discussion. Let's see. Gosha, of course, asks questions. Gosha is on all our panels. So great to have examples of music and conflict resolution. Please guide us via concrete examples of language intertwined with music, all state broadcasts and video production use and need music. That's for Ijra. It's directed for Ijra, I guess. Ijra, did you
I think there are plenty examples on this. On recently, he can have plenty singers in Addis, starting from Tigrinya singers, Abraham, or the very simple example of Teddy Afro said, using two different kinds of rhythms. And there are plenty singers. He can find plenty singers of these examples. Elsa, I can't hear you.
Okay. A question for Ijra, Hera. Could you say more about how music transformed conflict during the 1974 revolution, especially the different bands, Imperial Bodyguard, for example, Agar Fikr, and on the other side, independent artists?
Well, on those period, people, the music which we're using is more of a kind of revolutionary songs, and using Bodyguard, Police. I don't think Agar Fikr and National Theatre they hadn't had it in the starting time and a revolutionary songs, but the military bands they used to have more revolutionary songs which agitated people to that idea. But the student movement do have some 2-3 songs who are using as an agitational songs. Okay. But the military band songs on the 1974 are more popular in the very beginning, the 1974 EC, Ethiopian calendar. Yes. No, European calendar, I mean, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but that's when really music, okay, this Lula mentioned it earlier, I think she said Zigabit, but there was Zigubin, because there was curfew in the city, and people went into the Zigubin houses. Zigubin houses are music houses, and you get into those houses at 11 p.m. and you don't leave until 6 a.m. in the morning or 7 a.m. in the morning. So music really flourished during that time, according to things that, I mean, a thesis that I read on Ximena Batrehan, which had researched on that. So the cassette recording really increased during the day. Lots of music were produced. People, bands like Roha band came into light. So, in times of travesty, music was really flourishing during that time. Not to resolve conflict, but to ease the soul, People were going through a lot of turmoil during that time. So to ease the soul, people went into all these music houses to listen to music. So I don't know about the conflict resolution part, but
Elsie, I'm not talking about the development of music in different periods. I'm talking about the music which is used for resolving conflicts. But yes, that was another one way of developing the music, the Gubin bit, and especially in Kasanchis, where people were using in the nightclubs also. But that's another thing, the development of music and commercial music. I'm talking about other issue.
Okay, so I understand. So any more people, you should ask some questions. I'm not getting any questions except for Gosha, and I don't want to give him another chance.
Oh, he has got another question. I would love to have it.
No, he's talking about Teddy Afro and some controversial issues, so I don't want to. But Dagmar has a question. Dag, you want to get on camera, or?
Tell him to give me a very simple question, not a very difficult one.
Not to you, to the literature people. Shurafel has a question, and then I'll come to Isaias and Jerusalem's question. Shurafel, you want to come on camera? Do you have a question to Gurmao and Lula?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Good.
Oh, yeah.
My question to Luleadey is, the writer being an American journalist, how did he position himself in the writing process? For instance, does he talk about Cold War politics? Because that locality, that situation was not just about local politics. It was also about global era of like Cold War. So how does the writer account himself being a Ferengi, an American journalist? How does he account for his own positionality, and does he address those kinds of questions? In a different way. Of course, he cannot come in person and write about it, but how does he bring these kinds of stories into the weaving of the plot? The second question to Luleadey is, I think you are about to speak about the ways in which questions of ethnicity, later articulated as a national question in the Ethiopian Revolution, how does the question of ethnicity figure into that novel? And one question for Girmau is, usually writers before the 1974 revolution, be it like academicians or novelists, any kind of artists, almost unanimously labeled as reformists, who are not radical enough. And the student movement narrative has been depicting itself as the only radical. It is with the arrival of the revolutionary students that Ethiopia has been considered as revolutionary. So what do you think about like Addis Alamayehu in Fikr Eska Maqaber, as well as in his other non-fiction writings such as Ethiopia ምን አይነት አስተዳደር ያስፈልጋታል? Weren't they in their own terms radical? And how do we understand radical? I don't know. I have these questions. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Elizabeth?
Lula and Girmau I'll come back to you after Lula and Girmau respond to this, Salah. Okay? Lula?
Okay, I see. Thank you, Surey, for the questions. It's actually interesting. Nowhere in the novel is mentioned the Cold War politics. However, another interesting aspect of the novel is that there is this American character who is a major character, Harrison Ford. He's doing a research on Kulubi. So in fact, what we see in the novel is that there is this tendency of ridiculing Orientalists, because there he is trying to carry out a research on Kulubi, trying to understand the culture, the people. However, he does not have the language or the cultural background that enables him to understand the country that he's trying to study. So we see that tendency. We kind of get that sense that Orientalists, in spite of being in the country that they're trying to write about, are very far removed from the people and the culture that they're trying to ask. So this is an interesting aspect of the novel from a foreigner's perspective, but there is no mention of Cold War. It simply focuses on the interaction between different ethnic groups and the tension between the church and tradition and modernity, which is expressed through the metaphorical or symbolic expressions of the church being at the center and everything revolving in closed circles around it. So coming to your next question, Surey, yes, there is very clear message that there were indeed diverse ethnic backgrounds in the characters. However, these characters come together in unity when it comes to their country. So this is, I think, a very important message that we get from this novel, because what I concluded from my study is that the reading of Kulubi shows the inter-ethnic relations of pre-1974 Ethiopia as founded on the bond cemented by patriotism, while it shows middle-class Ethiopians to be politically conscious and active in their struggle against Haile Selassie's system of government, which they believe is unjust. Overall, if just one lesson is to be learned from the novel, it's that ethnic diversity cannot be a deterring force which makes national unity unattainable. So that's what we see. We see people like Tesfaye, who is an Amhara, who is apparently a parody of Grumacho Teklehawariat on the one hand. And we also see Baria, a famous painter poet with vitiligo, who is supposedly a parody of Gabra Christos Desta. However, he does not resemble Gabra Christos Desta in his entire traits, because Baria seems to be very bitter. So Baria is an Oromo character, Tesfaye is an Amhara. So these two characters are friends. They don't agree on the fact that the root cause for Ethiopia's problem is, for Baria, the oppressive dominant Amharas, whereas for Tesfaye, it's mismanagement of resources and lack of good governance. And what we see in the novel is also that the Amhara characters take the upper hand in being vociferous critics of the system. They come like at the forefront, and they kind of risk even their lives in order to sort of express their resistance. So yes, there are ethnic relationships expressed in different levels. However, one thing that makes them common as Ethiopians is their love of their country. I think I've answered your questions, Ray.
Yes, yes. Okay, Salah, can you ask the question? Salah.
Okay, thank you. Just 1 second. I'll try to be very brief. I mean, I don't know the character of Edmund Marie. I've never heard about the book, but I was just curious and kind of researched it a little bit to understand about the background itself and the kind of book, because it struck me as an American who was writing about Ethiopia in the 70s. So, and then I read something about his own background, which seemed to be very curious. He was a media consultant for the Shah of Iran in the pre-revolution, before he came to Addis, or after, maybe. I think it's very funny, I mean, because that was 72 Iran. And he was also a CIA agent, the paid one, in real life. That's what I read about him, and I also got an interesting review about it that seems like that the book itself is almost autobiographical, in a sense, that Harry could be the alter ego of Edmund Murray himself. So what was this guy doing in Ethiopia anyway? I mean, I find it, because it's a tumultuous time, and spies flourish at that time, because they always come to try to understand change, and they send together, and they're not necessarily reporters of a specific incidents or spying on a specific individual, but they generally just to understand the general atmosphere.
Lula?
That's to you, Luleadey.
Luleadey.
Okay, yes, that is correct. I found out that he was working as a CIA agent as well, but the purpose of my study was not to focus. It was not like a sort of I didn't want to consider what the authorial background in this is, because like I said, what I was interested in was how he sees the lives of Ethiopians during that period. But yes, that is true. He, in certain instances, I found out that he was working as a CIA agent. However, there aren't, again, still enough biographical information on the author as well. Even the reviews are quite a few. I found the reviews basically on the New York Times publication. So unlike the other works, by the way, this was part of my dissertation, but I have completely changed the focus for this particular purpose. But when I was searching for information regarding reviews and biographical information, there weren't many. So I didn't want to get into that because of the fact that there wasn't enough information on that. But yes, I have also read about him as a CIA agent. So that's what I can say. Salah.
Thank you, Lula. And then there's a question from Shimalis, a long question, but I just want to sum it up saying, okay, thank you for all the presenters. I wanted to hear their take on how a given historical moment is retrieved in all its fascinating complexity and leads to a single, albeit comprehensive narrative of the past. The past and memory of it is so vast and complex, and how can we tell it without being selective, privileging some stories, memories, while suppressing, marginalizing others? Should a single book have a dominant story to tell, or be as multifocal, polyphonic as possible, telling multiple, even oppositional accounts and accounting of the past? Aida, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sorry, I was reading a couple of other questions.
Okay, no, Shimalis, who's a historian, is saying the past and memory of it is so vast and complex, and how can we tell it without being selective, privileging some stories while suppressing others? Although yours is a memoir and you just took really an oral history of your grandmother's story, so you really indulge in making a history out of it. Okay, great, thank you. So can some of you want to take a stab at this too? Lula and Girma? Lula or Girma? No?
Okay, go ahead, Girma.
Go ahead. No.
Well, I think by its very nature, literature is polyphonic, meaning it gives voice to different voice that have been silenced in other genres, for example. So yes, literature can sort of help in illuminate historical aspects of a people or a country. I'm not a writer. I'm just a student of literature, so I cannot claim to have all the answer for that. But obviously, like I was trying to suggest at the beginning, referring to literary works can at best help us have a comprehensive understanding of literature, a full understanding of literature. So in that regard, I always say that literature plays an immense role. So I think it's by its very nature, it's polyphonic. So we hear different voices in a given piece of work. That's what I can say.
So to Aida, I'll take 2 or 3 questions. Aida, Aida, Paulos Berhanu is asking you, I enjoyed reading your wonderful book when it first came out and could relate your grandmother's yet a menu story with my own grandmother's experience in a different part of the country during the same period. Having been close to the experiences of the Derg era, especially your father, Professor Ida Mariam's Agga's role as a leading physician of the era, her father, Aida's father, by the way, opened up the first hospital. You have to clarify, Aida. Do you think there should be a similar story to be researched or written based on the human impact of disease, famine, red terror, wanton killing, etc., etc., etc.? Aida, can you tackle that? And then we'll go to Robel Teklabs, and then we'll come back to music, and then we'll close it up. Yeah. But I think what made I just want to make this point too, what made your story very poignant is that most of us, like I told you in my generation, lived through that, your grandmother's life. We were raised by grandmothers like her. And then knowing the language made it very, very important. Like you had to go, like you said, yet utilage. What is yet utilage? You had to, you heard it, but then you have to research it. By speaking to people, etc. So these nuances become very, very, very important. Yeah, you narrowed that gap because you did the research in the language, and your father helped, you said, in that process. So that's very important. So that's why I raised, and I'm not taking away from the questions, but that's why I raised this story of the historical novel, this imagination of the historical novel in the diaspora and in the local setting. Is it 2 different? Why is it? Of course, history is very. History is very contested. Imagination can be history too. So, but besides that, there's empirical stories that happen through history, right? So those histories you have to relate to, and language is a big impediment for the relationship to falter. You know what I mean? So for you to be successful, the language made it very successful. This book very successful, knowing the language. Okay, so let's go back to music. Two questions. I still had one question, but it relates to Roberta Kraab's question. For Germa Fantai, for many people, the song and clip of Teddy Afro's Maris Katwaf song is going to be their exposure to Fikr Makaba. I didn't say that, but I'm just adding that. Would you please say if Teddy Afro's song and its clip directed by Amlesat Muche did justice to the novel? And then, can you please ask your question? Because I seem to have, I can't scroll it to the beginning. So can you ask your question, Sirin? I see you there. I see you.
Yes, hi, Elsie. I just asked, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Because I'm on data. I just asked if Professor Ezra would agree that Teddy Afro's brand of music, even though it really tries to add the sounds of ethnic minorities, is essentially Ethiopianist and therefore quite reductive. There's a lot of reference to Ethiopia's imagined greatness, a lot of imagined unity, which can be quite insulting to other notions of Ethiopianisms or to ethno-nationalist understandings of the country. So I was just curious what Professor Ezra thought about this. Thank you.
Ezra, can you answer Sirin's question on Teddy Afro?
Yeah, I'm not only focusing on this question, but I just tried to read some of the questions which I just posted on. But generally, what I'm just thinking is not only Teddy, but my emphasis as a music, what music is providing to the people, what music provides an excellent medium for understanding conflict. The thing in terms of music has got different kinds of structures. In terms of musical structure, conflict is a significant theme of music theory. We do have dissonances, has functional significance in many musical systems. In terms of musical materials, suppose we do have conflict often appears in a symbolic guise, with musical instruments employed either a warlike display or an aggressive exhibition of different societal structures. And we do have different kinds of this type of structures on musical thinking. So taking Teddy Afro's music or other types of music, when we are just looking, and any musical compositions can fuse different kinds of elements. Teddy might be taking minorities music or different kinds of musical structures. That doesn't putting wanting to other kinds of things, but that's what we are just thinking as a musical element, bringing together different kinds of cultural contexts, not degrading or putting some cultures to other parts of or political contexts. But the thing is, what I'm just thinking, whether Teddy or other singers, what they did is they're just trying to bring different kinds of societal structure, that's music, into resolving conflict through their music.
Okay, so Jerusalem's question on music, Israel, that's for you too. These times music can be polarizing. For example, Tigrinya music and video are about showing economic superiority, whereas the Amhara are mostly about nationalism, which in my view reinforces the separation and the problematic relationship, not the unity. So,
but that's an opinion.
I didn't realize Tigrinya music was only economic based. Anyway, but that's okay. Can you answer that, or do you have a comment on that, Ijra?
No, simply I took it as just a comment on an opinion of individuals, but it's not really what's happening exactly on the ground.
Okay, so one more question. Okay, that's for the music. We're done. Now one more question on Wilson from Nairobi. Are there any emerging trends in more recent historical novels that deal with Ethiopia post-1991? Specifically curious about literary cultures outside of Amharic. For example, adoption of Kube and its impact on the literature. Girma and Luleadey, do you have a comment on that? Or Luleadey, do you have any comment?
Actually, no, but I'd like to mention the fact that, to my surprise, there aren't many books written on Ethiopia, since the Derg period. In my research, trying to find out books on Ethiopia, I'm talking about books written by foreigners, because my major is English literature. So even though I focus on books on Ethiopia, then I try to kind of give it that foreign aspect. So most of the books that I came across deal with Ethiopia and during the imperial regime and before. So there isn't much, as far as I'm concerned, written on Ethiopia since the time of the Derg, even though I don't know what the reason is.
Okay. So I'll just close it with Robel's question on history and fiction set in the past seem different things to me unless one is reading books like Ba'alu Girma's Oromai, which is almost journalism, with changed names. Memoirs of actual people, however, are often used when writing history. With an absolute love and appreciation for literature, which enriches our understanding, is it fair to include creative writing or fiction with characters, not actual persons, into the archives of history? So I wanted to bring that because for some of us who are excluded from the archives of Ethiopian history, we have to get into the informal archive from every source to understand our history. Women, for particular, women in Ethiopian history, completely excluded from the archive. And I've worked in the archive of the Institute of Ethiopian Studies for 6 years, and I haven't seen anything about women. So where do you go to historicize women, for example? Except for 3-4 women that are mentioned in history, Taitu, Chwara Gergetle, and all these people. I mean, 4 women we know in history that come up every time. So where do you go? You go to the informal archive, literature included, poetry included. That's one aspect of history, like people that are excluded from history. Where do you go? To the unofficial archive, like literature and poetry and all these, music. And that's what I did for the visual arts as well, since nothing was written on the visual arts. When I constructed the book, where did I go? I went to the 60s. The 60s were intimately connected to literature. The visual arts was intimately connected to literature, poetry, theater, cinema. So they were these characters were intimately connected, their stories were intimately connected to. So you had to solicit, you had to get into the archives of the non-official documents, like literature and poetry, to understand the history of the visual arts. So I just wanted to, because Robel was asking, the literary imagination is different than history. So we have to really change our understanding of history. So what is history, So does it represent me? Does the archive represent me? No, it does not. So where do I go? So these are the kinds of questions that we really have to interrogate. History is very subjective, so history, as we're told the other day, is very evidence-based, which is not true. So anyway, the contestation of history we have to accommodate for too. So I want to close it with that, unless there's a comment from any of the panelists. Is there any comment, Ida? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Ida.
I just wanted to say that one of the most useful books for me in my research was something that you might know, which is called Tradition and Change, Ethiopia.
We can't hear you.
Yeah. It was a book called Tradition and Change in Ethiopia, which is actually a very, very, very detailed study of Ethiopian fiction. But finding out how the Ethiopian, culture of a particular time, I found it so. It was basically looking at weddings, and then looking at what you found out about weddings through Amharic fiction, and then looking at sort of gender relations, looking at and then a study of gender relations through all this fiction. It was incredibly, incredibly useful, and much more useful to me than a straight history book. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you. Girma, do you have anything, or Lula, before we go?
Elsa?
Go ahead, Rujana, do you have anything?
Yeah, the thing is, I like the Gossa's questions, but I would love to contact him personally, but his question is very, very fundamental and very nice questions.
Yeah, I know.
I want to appreciate his questions.
But I've addressed one, and it's, I mean, Gosha sends 12 or 13 questions. So one.
Yeah, I know. I read it. I'll meet him personally.
Talk to him personally. So that's great. Any comment from anybody so we can close it? No? Thank you so much, all of you, for a wonderful panel. The next session would be on modernity and memory. So you have to get out from this link and then re-sign again for the modernity and memory link. And thank you so much, Aida, Gurmao, Luleadey, and everybody, all the participants. And Ijra, I keep forgetting, he's my boss, you know. I keep forgetting Ijra. Since you're my boss, that's why. Thank you so much and good night, and hope join us for the next session, please.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.